Nun möchte ich Ihnen einen der Preisträger des letzten European Award for Ecological Gardening genauer vorstellen, den Phoenix Garden. Der Phoenix Garden ist ein ökologisches Paradies für Pflanzen, Tiere und Menschen, ein kleines Stück Wildnis mitten in einem der dicht verbautesten Teile Londons. Und wer könnte besser über diesen Garten berichten als sein leitender Gärtner? In London aufgewachsen, erkundete er bereits im Kindesalter Londons Grünräume, plante später Naturgärten im Vereinigten Königreich, in Südfrankreich und in den Alpen. Ein herzliches Willkommen also für einen echten Naturgartenbotschafter Chris Raeburn.
Hello everyone, my name is Chris Raeburn and I'm the Community Gardener at the Phoenix Garden, an independent charity and community wildlife garden in the Soho Covent Garden area of central London. I'm going to talk briefly about the history of the garden, about how we manage the space, and about the work we have been doing over the past 10 years to ensure our long-term future. I hope there are elements of our story that you will find interesting and useful. The Phoenix Garden is the last of the Covent Garden community gardens. There were originally 7 created by the local community on vacant lots in the 1970s. There was a Japanese garden, a water garden and a chess garden among them. The last of these closed for redevelopment in the early 80s. The Phoenix Garden was created in 1983 by the local community on the site of a car park, a former bomb site, and opened to the public in June 1984. It is small, only a third of an acre. The land is owned by the local authority and 15 years ago was valued at £20 million. We have it on a 20-year lease. The garden is open to the public every day of the year and receives an estimated 65,000 visits a year. The garden is managed by volunteers made up of local residents and workers in the area, both on the board of trustees and as volunteers working in the garden. It employs 1 member of staff, and that's me. The local community is made up of social housing residents, many on very low incomes, residents of luxury apartments costing millions of pounds on very high incomes, and the daily influx of thousands of people who travel into the centre of London for work. Very few people have gardens. The garden functions as a village green, and we put on a range of community events throughout the year. Despite the visible wealth in the area, much of Covent Garden is classed as having high levels of social deprivation, and the area is Britain's largest illegal street drug market. This does present challenges. Being on a former bomb site, the garden sits on top of rubble-filled cellars and has only very thin rubble-filled soil. Being in the centre of London does mean the garden benefits from an urban heat island effect. It is sheltered and warm, and it is unusual to get many days of hard frost in winter. Unlike in the movies, it does not rain every day in London. In the southeast of England, our average annual rainfall is under 60 centimetres, and going months without proper rain is not uncommon. We are unusual for a community garden in that we do not generally do food growing or have individual allotment plots. Food growing does not work for us, it all gets stolen. As our tagline states, we are a garden for people and a garden for wildlife, and we work to put on an ornamental wildlife garden to be a retreat from the stress of the city for local residents, workers and other visitors, and to provide an experience of nature in the centre of the city available nowhere else locally. It is often described as an oasis. Personally, I'm critical of many wildlife gardens. They are often good for wildlife but forget the garden element. Many city people cannot read wild spaces, and for the garden to be respected, it must be readable as a garden. And that means flowers, lots of flowers right throughout the year. We aim to provide quality habitat for urban wildlife, including the West End's only frogs, and we work to showcase sustainable gardening techniques. We manage the garden keeping in mind there are no pests, there are no weeds, there is no need to water, and good gardeners have hard hearts. What do these mean in practice? There are no pests. I do not understand wildlife gardening and then cherry picking as to what wildlife is deemed acceptable. I want it all. For example, I am always asked, what do we do about slugs and snails? And I'm always asked, what do we do about aphids? And I always reply, I don't worry about them. For us, remember, we are not growing soft succulent lettuces. Slugs and snails are simply part of the recycling team eating their way through fallen leaves, and by eating thousands of small seedlings, they do the weeding for us. Of course, when they eat something precious, newly planted down to the ground, I get frustrated and I curse them. But this simply teaches us what plants are suitable to grow in the long term. Remember, plants hard grown without artificial fertilisers will usually establish easily. Aphids, of course, are simply wiped off by hand where they are causing damage. There are no weeds. We have no weeds, just wildflowers. The wildflower species are in the main brownfield site species, a habitat that has been lost in London at an alarming rate as a result of building development. The species underpin our ecosystem and will arise from any bare soil from the seed bank it contains. Species like oxeye daisy, black horehound, greater celandine, bristly oxtongue and many more grow themselves. They provide a self-sustaining, reliable supply of nectar and pollen and are food plants for many of the invertebrate species in the garden. Some, of course, are ornamental. Some are less so, but all are important. For example, sow thistle is not very attractive, but each year moth caterpillars eat the developing seed heads. If we removed all the sow thistles, we would lose these unknown moths. Stinging nettles can give a feeling of wildness that few garden ornamentals can replicate. Big clumps of nettles are partnered with tough, vigorous ornamentals like geranium claridge druce and comfreys to fight it out, and we cut them back as required. To keep on top of things, we manage the garden by grazing like cows. Though our cows are a lawnmower and old bread knives. A few hours a week spent cutting back manages their vigour in our dry conditions and provides lots of material for our compost bins. Even vigorous weeds will succumb to repeated cutting back. We have only one plant I consider a weed, Allium triquetrum, which is an evil winter-leafing onion that murders neighbours efficiently and spreads rapidly. Don't plant it. There is no need to water. The garden has not been watered in over 10 years. We only water new planting for the first year and, of course, containers. The rest of the garden is sustained by natural rainfall. When we used to water with a hose, you could hear the water simply running down into the cellars below. It is pointless. We rely on using plants naturally adapted to summer dry conditions. Species from southern Europe, South Africa and California all do well with us and will flower throughout the summer months. We accept the seasonality this brings, though sometimes you do need nerves of steel as the garden transitions from spring to summer dry, as plants growing dormant wilt and shrivel as the drought lovers take over. For some volunteers this is too much, and I catch them sneaking cans of water up the garden. Good gardeners have hard hearts. If a plant doesn't do well for you, rip it up and compost it. There's always something else that would do much better. If a plant has grown for years and years, but is now far too big, really ugly, and gets on your nerves, ignore the sentimental voices, take some cuttings if you must, but rip it up and compost it. If you are offered donations of ugly, old, but much loved plants, be honest. Tell them you'll compost it. Building for our future. For 30 years, the charity was housed in and run out of a simple concrete block shed. Expected to be replaced after 5 years, it started to fall down after 25. It had no proper facilities, no toilets, no drainage, and water was from a legal hosepipe strapped to the water main. And it was infested with mice. This severely limited the work we could do and had serious implications for our future plans. 10 years ago, as plans for a new local development were presented, the Renzo Piano-designed Central St Giles building, it became clear there was an opportunity for us to access large-scale funding. Planning regulations meant that large developments must make available funds for local communities to offset against the construction. Developer bribes, in effect. We applied for funds to improve the garden's infrastructure and to construct a new garden building, and we were awarded £300,000 towards the project. At the same time, we began negotiations for a new lease for the garden, we thought in good time. In actuality, it took us 9 years to negotiate a new lease, and delays with this held up our building plans for 3 years. Rumours grew that the garden was to be sold off, like so many other assets have been in London. It was a great relief to eventually sign a new 20-year lease in 2015, and this allowed the building work to move ahead. An architect, Gurmeet Sian, was appointed with the brief, using the existing footprint of the existing buildings to provide a multi-purpose space for community events, to house the charity and to generate income, to provide the necessary facilities, toilets, kitchenette, office space, storage, to be sustainable and cheap to run, to be a building that was part of the garden and not a building in the garden. Work finally began on construction in October 2015 and took a year, being completed in October 2016. In total, we had to raise just over £500,000 for the project. Looking back, it is amazing how well we did in attracting funding. The building provides us the space we need for running the charity, for community events, volunteer work days, workshops and education. It has 2 toilets, a small kitchen and a tool store. It is super insulated and heated with an air source heat pump. It has a biodiverse brown roof, a rooftop propagation area and rainwater catchment, if ever we do need to water the garden. With the building construction completed by the contractors, we were left with a construction site to re-landscape. This was a rather daunting task with just one gardener and a group of weekend volunteers. Work began in October 2016 with digging out rubble and adjusting the levels. The building, needing step-free access at street level, sat a metre lower than the rest of the garden. Tons of brick and concrete rubble were dug out and saved. Tons and tons of compacted rubble and earth were moved by hand to prepare the area. We were keen to use all the materials on site. Building waste removal is incredibly expensive. And I was keen to maximise on our dry garden experiences. Rubble is an opportunity. Many plants adapted for drought are short-lived and prone to pest damage when grown on rich, heavily composted ground. Grown on very dry, stony, poor soils, they are long-lived and trouble-free. All the rubble was passed through a mini crusher by volunteers, over 25 tonnes. And this material was used to construct raised beds, crushed rubble heaps, with a very small amount of soil mixed in. These raised beds on the crest of the level change has accentuated the sense of slope of walking down into the building and has created the perfect conditions for the plant selection. Garden regulars, Echinops, Nepeta, Achillea, have been paired with unusual Phlomis, Teucrium and Buplurum to create self-sustaining, long-term planting that's easily and quickly established. These beds have been watered once. New brick paths were laid to slope gently to the building, ensuring it is fully accessible from the garden. Laid on gravel and not on the usual sand ensures that any rain falling can soak away into the ground to support the planting, and in particular, the new lawn. The new lawn has been grown from seed. The ground was improved with tons of topsoil and green waste compost being brought in. The ground was shaped to form a shallow swale to retain any rainfall and allow it to soak in. On rubble, we don't have any drainage issues. Seed was sown in May and then covered with a thick layer of straw. to protect the ground from footfall for our launch party events, and also to mulch the ground and save the seed from the ever-present and ever-hungry pigeons. The bulk of the straw was removed after 2 weeks to reveal excellent germination, and establishment has been rapid. The lawn opened to the public in mid-August. It has been watered 3 times and never will be again. While traditional lawns are unsustainable, lawns are important for visitor enjoyment of the garden. We will accept any changes during periods of drought. Brown grass is the colour of summer. When rain arrives, it will regreen, for we know this is what grass is adapted to do. New seating has been created out of gabion boxes filled with rubble. They are vandal-proof, cheap seating and provide excellent habitat for invertebrates. Reclaimed granite curbstones have been repurposed as stone block seating. One of our first events in the new building was the presentation of our Natur im Garten plaque. It's the only one in the UK. As we redevelop our events programme, it's great to see how the building and garden are working together. Visitor responses have been enthusiastic. The new planting is receiving lots of interest. Again, visitors cannot believe we do not water anything. Our first regular community groups are now using the building. Seniors chair yoga love the space. We are looking for our first regular children's and infants groups to start in the autumn. The income generation from the garden and building commercial hires is starting to come in, and hopefully will give us some freedom from the endless treadmill of fundraising applications. With the building accepted as a venue for civil partnerships and marriages, we are looking forward to the first weddings being held in the near future, and the garden becoming part of people's life stories. We believe these connections to people's lives will help secure a future for the garden in the long term. The hard work of garden trustees and volunteers has paid off. While all seems good at the moment, and we can afford to take time to relax somewhat, there are challenges looming on the horizon. Cuts to services in London, particularly policing, are affecting communities, and street drug use in the area is growing out of all proportion. Property prices are changing the makeup of our local communities as ordinary families are priced out and social housing is sold off. Land values mean we plan to soon begin negotiations to seek a community asset transfer for the garden to become community owned. And as for Brexit, we wait to see what that will do to us. Thank you very much.
Ein ganz herzliches Dankeschön. Thank you very much, Chris Raeburn. Und es wird, wie gesagt, im Workshop noch Gelegenheit geben, sich genauer über den Garten zu informieren. Ich glaube, man hat an den eindrucksvollen, wirklich schönen Bildern gesehen, dass es auch in sehr eng verbauten Gebieten möglich ist, grüne Oasen zu schaffen und wie wichtig die für das städtische Leben, aber auch für die Gemeinschaft sein können. Thank you very much.
Thank you.